Who remembers all the way back in January? I know, it seems like 4 decades ago. I want to take us back for a moment to January 5th. Why, you might ask? This was the day that the 14th cycle of Daf Yomi began, meaning the approximately 7.5-year-long cycle of reading the 2,711 pages of Talmud, 1 page a day, throughout these years. It was starting anew, and as a special treat, it was also connected with the secular New Year, making it a great time for a bunch of Jews to jump on the Daf Yomi bandwagon just before the pandemic hit, when most of us fell off. As I've gotten to know the Talmud better over this mostly daily practice, over the last 9 months, I've sarcastically been creating a new section of Talmud entitled Tractate Coronavirus, all about what the rabbis would say that we should or shouldn't do amid this pandemic, with all of the extra debating and tangents and sections where you have no idea what they're even talking about that is typical of the Talmudic style. And I imagine the first chapter of this tractate would concern the topic of pikuach nefesh, the preservation of life, where so many Jewish leaders began as we decided how to respond to this pandemic. The first Mishnah, the first legal statement, would have something to do with social distancing, perhaps along the lines of, Rabbi CDC said in the name of Rabbi WHO that each person should stay 4 cubits apart at all times. And if persons live in the same household, it is permitted to be within 4 cubits. If persons do not live in the same household, walking within 4 cubits is prohibited, called v'chomer, all the more so. Standing for conversation within 4 cubits is absolutely prohibited. Rabbi's State Health Department said that one should remain in their own dwelling place in the private domain as much as possible to avoid even possibly coming within 4 cubits of a neighbor. And I imagine the Gemara, the rabbinic elaboration that follows after discussing that 4 cubits is 6 feet for those of you not fluent in Talmudic measures, and whether it should be more or should be less, or if wearing a mask, whether surgical or cloth, makes it permissible, etc., etc., etc. That's the Talmud for you. A rabbi would interject with a question challenging Rav Health Department's statement, saying, but if one is to stay in their homes as much as possible, how would they continue to live a full Jewish life, one that requires attending synagogue for prayer, observing holidays with the community? This afternoon, we'll read from the Holiness Code, where I like to teach that almost all of the commandments require interaction between people, while our physical distancing has created a lot of loneliness and less interaction. I imagine that Rav community would respond that as we learned in Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, B'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel lehiot ish, generally understood to mean, and removing the gender from the Hebrew, in a place where people are not acting decently, behave decently. And I'm looking at this a little bit differently this year, after 9 months of studying the Talmud and 6+ months of pandemic life. The Talmudic method is to examine these statements from every possible angle, and sometimes and then some. So in our imaginary new tractate, the rabbis, I think, would ask, what is the meaning of in a place where there are no humans? What if they meant that literally? We have found ourselves, some at home, living alone, literally without other human beings, in physical proximity, and others with greatly limited circles of physical interaction. We have been living in a place, to some extent, without other humans. We have had to answer this question of what it looks like to live without as much physical connection, to lead Shabbat services from home, to have a Passover Seder from our living rooms on Zoom. Handshakes may well be a thing of the past, and giving way to waves or nods or bows or perhaps Mr. Spock will become the normal, and I won't go into the sermon on that particular sign. So perhaps we take this teaching literally, not only when no one is looking, but even when no one is around. Behave like a normal human being. Take a shower, get dressed, even if nobody can see your pajama pants on that Zoom call. Still try to establish human connections, make a phone call, write a card, say hi to a neighbor walking their dog, drop off a mask instead of mailing it as much as possible. That seems obvious, though. Then I imagine another rabbi would raise a whole different point, drawing on the racial justice issues of our time. In a place where there are no other people, strive to be human. I regret that I don't remember where I heard this, but I recall seeing a piece talking about how the pandemic is like we are all in the same storm, but in different boats. One boat might be a cruise ship, while another is the Titanic, or a rowboat, or a canoe. Just because one boat can weather the storm doesn't mean another can. What has become evidently clear to me this year is that while we have made and are hopefully making great strides towards racial justice, gender equality, and more, there is still a lot of difference between the boats out there, and many need help weathering the storm of life more than our own. I am lucky. My position is one that's allowed me to work from home, that allowed me to struggle to find a balance between being a parent for dependent children and work as best I could, often at odd hours around my family's schedules. I fall in the lower risk category for complications from COVID should I contract it. I have a house and the financial stability to store extra food and supplies and order most things through delivery that limit my exposure. Aspects of pandemic life have certainly been challenging for my family and myself, but I have faith that the Sobo boat will weather this storm. But in my place, where it is just the Sobos around, I also know I cannot forget about the other boats out there, and that it is my duty to help them weather the storm too. All the more so when this pandemic, God willing, in the near future ends, we need to do more to help bolster all of the boats in the storm of life. And I imagine since the Talmud loves threes, there would be another debate. Why does the original teaching say strive to be human, as opposed to just be a human? Wouldn't omitting the word strive make the statement more powerful? And this is why I think it's an apt teaching for Yom Kippur, as we navigate the waters of coronavirus and the pressing social justice issues of our time, to ask that all our actions be the best possible human actions they could be would be impossible. The al-chaitz that we recite throughout this day come from a Hebrew root that means missing the mark, like in archery. It's not that I tried to hit the wall instead of the target. I was going for a bullseye. I'm not an archer. A question posed during rabbinical school by a colleague was, what is it that we take for granted now, that in the future our children and grandchildren will say, can you believe that blank was allowed or accepted by our ancestors? 10 years ago, when this question was first posed, I had a little bit of a hard time filling in that blank. Today, not so much. Can you imagine that our generation allowed cops to kill innocent Black people, that women were paid less than men for the same work, that immigrants and refugees were treated inhumanely, that we exploited our environment as much as we do, that we used to commute sometimes up to an hour or more to work when we could telecommute, that we used to shake each other's hands? How gross. Even if our answers as to how to resolve some of these societal issues differ, the blanks seem so much more numerous to me today. Yet we are also learning more by the day, week, and month. I didn't know the word anti-racist existed several months ago. I didn't know that I could rabbi from the guest room of my house. I didn't originally think cloth masks would do as much as they do to protect against the virus. As we navigate the remainder of 2020, as we navigate what this year of 5781 has in store for us, there's one thing I know for certain. I will have plenty of all hates to atone for come 5782. And that is why the word strive is so important. It's not all or nothing. Each and every day we must choose to strive to be the best we can. B'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel lihiot ish. In this liminal year of 2020, in the isolation, in the uncertainty, in the political divisiveness of a major election year, in all these storms, literal and metaphorical, in this place, God is with us, and we must strive to be the best people that we can, in a place where it is just you, in your home, in your boat, in your consciousness. Strive to be a human, no matter who is watching, no matter the situation. Gemar Chatima Tova, may we all be sealed for a good year, and next year, may we all be in a place with more humans and more humanity around us. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will.